Welcome, everyone, to the Rural Clean Energy Funding Opportunities Across Federal Agency webinar. We will begin momentarily in about 30 seconds or so to let folks join the room. Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to USDA Rural Utilities Service, IRA Cross-Agency Rural Clean Energy Funding Opportunity webinar. This event is jointly hosted by U.S. Department of Agriculture, Department of Energy, Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Treasury. We are greatly honored today to have the White House representation as well. This has been truly a collaborative effort aimed to introduce a diverse set of new and existing clean energy funding opportunities across federal agencies that are eligible to rural stakeholders. Before we get to this exciting presentation, I'd like to quickly go over the Zoom meeting attendee control panel so you know how to participate and interact with our panel today. We look forward to your questions and comments. This slide shows a screenshot of the Zoom attendee control panel. And we're going to start on the left and make our way over to the right to go over some functions. First, number one is the mute and unmute button. All attendees are in listen-only mode for the duration of the event. Number two is the chat function. This will be disabled during the presentation. However, the host will be dropping important resource links for you to save throughout this presentation. And number three is the question and answer function. This is the big one. Please ask any questions or comment throughout the presentation here, and our panel will address them at the end. And lastly, number four is the leave button. So for whatever reason you need to leave, that's where you do so. But with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Andy Burke, your administrator for USDA Rural Utilities Service. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Scott. Y'all are here today because there are historic opportunities made possible by President Biden's leadership in passing the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the largest investments in clean energy in history. For you, your pocketbooks, and the health and prosperity of those in your community, this is transformative. And to get us started on this webinar, we have John Podesta. For the last 30 years, John has been at the center of solving every major problem facing our country. Inside of government, he's worked at the White House to push initiatives that brought more Americans into the middle class and raised the standard of living in communities working hard to improve, like mine in Tennessee. Outside of government, he's been a major thinker informing how to respond to the problems of today as well as tomorrow. He brings that wealth of experience to his role as senior advisor to the president for clean energy innovation and implementation. With President Biden focused on delivering clean, reliable energy to Americans at the lowest cost possible, John Podesta is driving results in our whole of government approach. John, over to you.
Thanks so much, Administrator Burke, and a big thanks to you and RUS and to USDA Rural Development for hosting this webinar, and to all of our federal partners who are presenting today. Thanks for joining. It's great to be here with all of you. President Biden took office with a vision to rebuild the American economy from the middle out and the bottom up. Now, 2.5 years later, that vision is becoming a reality with the president's Investing in America agenda, with clean energy at the center. It includes the Inflation Reduction Act, which, as Andy noted, is the most significant piece of clean energy legislation passed in our country's history. I'll go on one better. It's the biggest piece of clean energy legislation passed in the history of the world. The bill accelerates the deployment of clean technologies in the power sector, in transportation, in buildings, in agriculture and forestry, and in industry. And on top of that, the bipartisan infrastructure law invests in our nation's physical infrastructure and in next generation technologies like green hydrogen, carbon capture, and geothermal. Altogether, the Investing in America agenda is charting a path toward a clean, affordable, reliable energy future, one that will be built in rural America. Rural communities host the majority of new clean energy generation in the United States. 74% of utility scale solar and 99% of utility scale wind are in rural counties. And since President Biden took office, we've seen more than $250 billion in new clean energy investments from the private sector in every corner of the country, from Dalton, Georgia, to Rosebud, Montana, to the Salton Sea in California. We want these trends to continue, and we want rural communities to feel all the benefits of clean energy development: cleaner air and water, lower energy costs, good paying, high quality jobs, and more investment in local schools and businesses. Thanks to President Biden, over half a dozen agencies across the federal government are offering historic funding to make that happen. You'll be hearing from several of them in a few minutes, but I want to give you a few highlights of the kind of programs we're implementing through the Investing in America agenda. Thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, USDA is making the biggest investment in rural electrification since the New Deal, and they're helping agriculture producers and rural small business access clean energy. The Department of Energy is upgrading and expanding the grid in rural areas through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And this president has elevated the issue of permitting transmission lines to the highest level of government, which has never happened before. Cabinet secretaries meeting regularly to work on the problem of connecting clean power generated in rural America to customers across the country. Last month, DOE's Loan Program Office released guidance on a new loan program created by the IRA to repurpose fossil fuel infrastructure that has ceased operations and to help install pollution control technology on infrastructure that's still running. And this month, the Treasury Department released guidance on something we call direct pay, a new provision from the IRA that will allow rural co-ops, nonprofits, tribes, and local governments to access clean energy tax credits for the first time. You can expect a lot more outreach on direct pay in the coming weeks and months. Whether you work at a rural co-op or a rural development advocacy group in local government, represent a tribal nation, or you're just an individual looking to install a heat pump or put solar on your roof, there are big opportunities here for you. Today, I encourage you to listen closely, consider combining these federal opportunities like claiming a tax credit and pursuing a grant, and think about how you can help bring the benefits of clean energy to your community. After all, this administration believes that investment in rural America is an investment in all of America, and we need your help to make these historic investments come to life. Thank you, and now let me turn it back to Andy Burke.
Thanks, John, and appreciate your leadership on the president's behalf. It really is transformative and such a great opportunity to have that kind of focus on this critical problem. So here's the program today. I'm going to start us off talking a little bit about what is going on at the United States Department of Agriculture. As John referenced, we have the largest investment in rural electrification since our founding almost 90 years ago. Then I'm going to turn it over to the Department of Energy. They'll lead into the EPA, and then finally the Treasury. Then we have some tremendous resources for you to take a look at. My colleague Jackie Pawnee will go over those with you, and then we'll finish with some question and answers from experts all across these agencies. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. Here you see the speakers. Next slide. So let's just frame this up for everybody. This is a critical issue for rural America. When we have dirty energy, that affects our economic prosperity and the health of families throughout rural America. And we want to make sure that we make investments that lift up opportunities for everybody in rural America. These are those kind of transformative investments. We also know that one thing that is going on overall is that the cost of renewable energy and zero carbon energy is coming down. Solar is now the cheapest source of new energy, and we want rural Americans to have access to it. So as you're going to see here, we're both the cost of energy is coming down in these sectors. And on top of that, we are taking some of the capital costs off through these initiatives, which means that you are really able to drive down the end cost of energy to rural consumers at the same time that you're making their energy cleaner. In addition to that, we have these really tremendous benefits, like making sure that we're buying these products that from American manufacturers. I know this is something that President Biden is really passionate about, and we talk about this piece all the time. So we're creating jobs in America as we make these infrastructure investments, ensuring that people are making a good wage when these jobs are created, and that we're seeing direct benefits to the rural communities on top of just the funding and making sure that the energy is affordable, making sure that there are other benefits coming to them as well. And in the long run, when we do this, lower the pollution in our air and our rivers, we make sure that these communities are more economically prosperous for the long run. Next slide, please. So at the USDA and the Rural Utility Service, we have two large new programs. The first is called Powering Affordable Clean Energy, or PACE. The next one is Empowering Rural America, or a New Era, because we are bringing a new era to rural America with these opportunities. My pay gets docked unless we make everything an acronym. So you see PACE and New Era. But it also makes it a lot easier to talk about rather than saying that every time. So I try to avoid acronyms, but these two we'll kind of stick with. Next slide, please. So what is, let's start with PACE. This is a lot like what you've seen the Rural Utility Service do in the past, with two big changes. Traditionally, we are an agency that loans out money to people and they pay us back, and then that makes energy affordable and reliable in the communities. But there are two changes that we have through PACE. One is this must be a renewable generation source: wind, solar, geothermal, hydropower. And the second is that you can do storage through the different renewable power pieces. And at least 50% of everything that is generated must go to rural customers. And then, so that's one piece. We've got to have renewable energy to get this loan from us. But the second piece is huge as well. And that is, for each of these loans, you will get some kind of loan forgiveness. For most any community, they will get 20% loan forgiveness. But much of of America falls into this second category: energy communities, distressed communities, or disadvantaged communities. Those get 40% loan. And then if you are in a territory or you serve a tribe, you can get up to 60% off. Now, here's what this means in real terms. You do a $10 million solar array you borrow that money from us, you get our preferred interest rate. But on top of that, if you serve an energy community, you're getting 40% off, which means you build that $10 million solar array and you only have to pay us back $6 million. That is huge. And then, as John noted, and you'll hear later from Treasury, you both have the tax credit piece, and for nonprofits, municipals, and all kinds of other people who haven't previously had access to this opportunity like tax credits, you now have these direct pay provisions, which you can stack on top of our opportunity. This is open for any kind of generator of energy, a for-profit, a nonprofit, a co-op, a municipal. Anybody can apply for PACE. Next page, please. The second piece is empowering rural America, or a new era. And this is a much more complicated piece. This is available only to rural electric co-ops, and they can do a wide range of things with our funding. I should have mentioned PACE is a $1 billion opportunity. Empowering New America is $9.7 billion. So in all, almost $11 billion just for rural America through these two initiatives. For this, you can do a renewable system. You can do a zero carbon emission system. You can do electric co-ops can do transmission lines and demand response software. Anything that they're going to do that's going to both reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that they generate, and also raise up the amount of zero emission or renewable energy that they're pumping out. So this empowering rural America new era is a competition. PACE is going to be put together. We're going to take it as they come in. We'll take the applications or the letters of interest, move them into an application phase. For empowering rural America new era, that is a competition. You get the most out of a grant from us if you reduce your greenhouse gas emissions to the largest degree. So there are two things that you get: grants up to 25% and as low as 0 or 2% interest rates from us if you're either serving a disadvantaged or energy dependent community, or you have a fossil asset that you've either previously closed or want to close. The letter of interest that you get for both PACE and New Era should be relatively simple. A few pages to describe what you're doing, how much it's going to cost, and what you want to do. And then if you're going to be in the money, we'll get you to go to a more complicated phase for these two in the application piece. For PACE, we've actually changed that opening window to July the 10th. So that's the new opening date. And for New Era, that's now July the 31st. Take a look at those online. Just to give you an idea from how transformative a New Era can be, there is a co-op that we're dealing with that currently has a fossil asset. They pay us $6 million a year just in interest. We can now refinance that and to a 0% interest, and all of a sudden those 36,000 ratepayers have zero interest to pay us. That ends up being the savings of about $146 a month for each and every one of those. So if a co-op like that were to win and to get a 0% interest loan, that is the kind of transformative piece it makes for both the energy side and the bottom line for people. Next slide. Finally, we have the Rural Energy for America program. This is much more focused on farms and businesses and making sure that they can install and capture their own renewable or zero carbon emissions. Next slide, please. So you'll see here, we have a bunch of different opportunities. We will make sure that that you get a piece of this. Jackie will be going over this later, but there are all kinds of different opportunities, and hope that you seek out which one might be most appealing to you and take advantage of it. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Department of Energy. We have Dr. Teresa Lawrence. She is the Director of State, Local, and Tribal Policy at the Department of Energy. As John mentioned earlier, they have a number of opportunities, and it has been exciting to work on this whole of government approach with them, as well as the other agencies on this call. Teresa, over to you.
Thank you, Administrator Burke. It is a pleasure to be here today. I'm so thrilled to be participating in this forum. It's always a pleasure to be available to discuss the federal resources that we've heard about already so far today, and share information and opportunities for priority communities through the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law. Of course, our focus today is on rural communities, and we are pleased to provide this overview of incentives and investments that can catalyze the nation's equitable transition to a clean, secure, affordable, and resilient energy system. The Department of Energy has a wide range of opportunities for funding and technical assistance across many offices and programs that will reduce energy costs, bolster the economy, address climate change, create good jobs, and empower communities to thrive in the clean energy economy. So today we'll be presenting just a snapshot. And if you can go to the next slide, we'll start with the Grid Deployment Office. DOE's Building a Better Grid initiative brings together community and industry stakeholders to identify national transmission and distribution needs. And we are highlighting two of the opportunities here today. The Grid Resilience State and Tribal Formula grants will strengthen and modernize America's power grid against wildfires, extreme weather, and other natural disasters. This is $2.3 billion over 5 years. And also the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnerships, GRIP program, includes funding opportunities to improve the resilience and reliability of the grid and enhance grid flexibility. And we have a breakout of three different buckets. So this is $10.5 billion, the Grid Resilience, Utility and Industry grants at $2.5 billion, Smart Grid grants, $3 billion, and Grid Innovation Program at $5 billion. And as has been mentioned, we're just touching briefly on all of these opportunities, and this information will be available for future reference. And of course, we'll also be on hand to answer any questions later on. And if you can go to the next slide. The Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, one very exciting and one of the signature programs, is the Energy Improvements in Rural or Remote Areas, which is funded at $1 billion overall to improve the resilience, safety, reliability, and availability of energy in rural or remote areas, and increase environmental protections from adverse impacts of energy use. And for this program, rural or remote areas are defined as cities, towns, or unincorporated areas with fewer than 10,000 inhabitants. This opportunity includes, with one of the first rounds, $300 million funding announcement, but that is currently in process, and a $50 million grant funding opportunity for community-based projects that will help ensure an equitable transition to a clean energy future. And for this second opportunity, the pre-applications are due on July 13th, 2023. The program is also developing a focused technical assistance through the national labs and through our partnership with EPA. Moving to the next slide. Another program, another office within DOE with lots of resources for rural communities is the State and Community Energy Programs Office. We have, of course, the legacy, but very effective weatherization assistance program and infusion of funds through the bipartisan infrastructure law, 3.168 billion for retrofits. And this funds the full suite of audits and retrofit activities at no cost to eligible low-income households, multi-family buildings. And very exciting, also as part of this overall suite, through the next slide, we see there's weatherization readiness, which allows the program to address non-energy barriers to starting weatherization work, funded at 30 million in FY23. Enhancements and innovation grants, $2 million competitive opportunity. And then finally, and all of these descriptions are here. Going to the next slide, the sustainable energy resources for consumers, all under the WAP umbrella, with all of these formula and competitive opportunities. Also, as part of the SCEP office, it's what acronyms, State and Community Energy Programs Office, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, or EECBG, as it's affectionately known. This provides formula and competitive grants for states, local, and tribal governments to implement strategies to reduce fossil fuel emissions, reduce total energy use, and improve energy efficiency. This is funded at 550 million, and it offers very flexible funding for a diverse range of activities, including energy planning, building energy audits and retrofits, electric vehicles and EV infrastructure, community solar, renewable energy, and even workforce development. And EECBG is massive in terms of its scale. It will reach more than 2,700 communities, serving more than 250 million Americans. And of course, we understand the importance of rural communities just being able to avail these communities of these types of very wide-ranging and flexible opportunities. And then rounding it out on the next slide, we know many of us have heard about the home energy rebates. So this is $9 billion overall, broken out into two types of rebates, the efficiency rebates at 4.3 billion. So this is in formula grants to assist with whole home upgrades. For example, installing insulation and a new heating and cooling system. In this program, participants are provided rebates based on the expected amount of energy they will save. And then on the next slide, we specify the electrification and appliance rebates program. This is 4.275 billion in formula grants to states, as well as 225 million in grants to tribes to install efficient electric technologies in low and moderate income single family and multifamily homes. So in this program, the rebate funding will flow from DOE to the states and tribes, and then to homeowners. So moving on to the next slide is the Loan Programs Office that we've already heard about today. A lot of financing opportunities, very exciting. A DOE Loan Programs Office works with the private sector to finance the deployment and scale up of innovative clean energy technologies, to build energy infrastructure and domestic supply chains, create jobs, and reduce emissions in communities across the US. So LPO offers senior secured debt priced competitively with commercial rates, and the total loan amount is up to 80% of eligible project costs. So we identified the suite here of four program areas, that we see listed here with the title 17, and just pulling out something that was mentioned at the top, the Energy Infrastructure and Reinvestment Program, or EIR, which provides $5 billion to carry out up to $250 billion in loan authority for projects that retool, repower, repurpose, or replace energy infrastructure that has already retired, and for operating energy infrastructure to avoid air pollution or greenhouse gas emissions. So these are very exciting programs that can really help to push the envelope with all of these funding opportunities, financing different financing types. And then lastly, we wanted to highlight some programs coming out of our Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains Office, which focuses on developing energy and energy sector industrial base through targeted investments. So just starting up with a quick overview of the suite of programs here. Not an exhaustive list, but a competitively awarded investment tax credit that I know we'll hear more about through the other presenters. 48C, a tax credit for clean energy manufacturing and recycling, critical materials and industrial greenhouse gas emissions reduction projects. Moving to the next slide, also highlighting $3 billion program, Consumer Electronics Battery Recycling Funding Opportunity, which provides funding to support the recycling of consumer electronics batteries and battery containing devices. And the next slide shows the Industrial Assessment Centers, IACs, very important piece to provide no-cost technical assistance to small and medium-sized manufacturers on energy efficiency and emissions reduction. So there was an infusion through the bipartisan infrastructure law for this program. And then lastly, on the final slide for the MESC office, $750 million funding for Advanced Energy Manufacturing and Recycling Grant Program. So that's through 2026. All of those, the $750 million for greenhouse gas emission reduction projects, which benefits small and medium-sized manufacturing firms with priority for minority-owned firms. So the last couple of slides here is the program's summary slides. So more information that we'll be making available for you to dig into for future reference for each of these program areas as it relates to application dates, award amounts, and other specifics as you plan your clean energy projects. We also have lots of information online, a ton of ongoing webinars, such as this one, just focused on each of these programs. So this is a snapshot of some of the programs we want to highlight for rural communities across all of the different end-use sectors. And at this time, I'll hand off to my colleague at EPA, Nicole Steele, at the Environmental Protection Agency, the Senior Advisor of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Nicole, over to you.
Thank you, Teresa. Really excited to be joining you today and talking about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. I know I only have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to talk fast. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, fantastic. So we're using the whole slide deck. I'm Nicole Steele. I wear 2 hats. I am at the EPA as a senior advisor. I joined the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund team in February, really to get these competitions out the door for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And so this is a new program that was created under the Inflation Reduction Act, and it is the single largest non-tax program at $27 billion. And so I want to be very, very clear that there are currently no competitions out on the street right now. But per statute, we have to have obligated these funds by September 2024. And so we are moving very, very quickly. There is information right now on the EPA website. So if you go to epa.gov/GGRF, there is a document called the Implementation Framework, which is what we published back in April. That really describes the strategy on how we are approaching 3 different competitions. And I'll get into those details on some next slides. So let's go to the next slide. Like I said, GGRF was created under the Inflation Reduction Act as an amendment really to the Clean Air Act. It was funded at a total of $27 billion, and it was broken into 2 categories. And so the first bucket, it was a $7 billion segment called the Zero Emissions Technology Program. And this program is geared towards states, tribal, and municipal governments, as well as eligible recipients. And those eligible recipients are essentially lending nonprofits. So a nonprofit that provides capital, but does not take deposits and does not, is funded by public or charitable contributions. And so the $7 billion fund is a essentially a grant program that those eligible applicants can use. And they can then in turn create a grant program, a loan program, or other forms of financial assistance to deploy zero emission technologies. This bucket is intended to be 100% geared towards low income and disadvantaged communities. And so then the other bucket for the statute is the general assistance in low income disadvantaged communities bucket. And this one is eligible to only those eligible recipients, which are those lending nonprofits that I described earlier. And what this nearly $10 billion bucket is meant to do is both direct investments in qualified clean energy projects, as well as indirect investments to ensure that those investments can be made. So whether that be technical assistance to lending institutions to build financial products, or build capacity, or even build project pipeline in this space. All of those are crucial elements to getting the direct investment out. And so again, as per statute, a minimum of 40% of these funds must go to low income and disadvantaged communities. So let's go to the next slide. So that's sort of what we were handed in order to sort of like create the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And then GGRF does have sort of three main objectives, and really those are to reduce emissions, to deliver benefits to American communities, particularly those in low income and disadvantaged communities, and then last but not least, really mobilize financing and private sector capital that is truly changing markets. And so, you know, one of the things I think folks say is that like $27 billion is a little bit of a lot of money. And so when you really start to parse out what 27 can do, it's again, a little bit of a lot. And so this is meant to be seeding a lot of leverage of that private sector capital and really helping move and unlock some of that private investment that has just been sort of waiting on the sidelines. So let's go to the next slide. And then I think this is probably the most interesting slide out of the deck. And this is really what we were able to dive into and create the framework for as part of that implementation framework that I mentioned earlier. And ultimately, these are the three competitions that we are currently designing. And so the first two fall under that $20 billion bucket. And then the last one that covers that $7 billion bucket. So the first competition will be the National Clean Investment Fund. And this is funded at nearly $14 billion. And we envision awarding somewhere between 2 and 3 national nonprofits to essentially provide that direct lending that I talked about earlier to move priority projects forward. And so really these are distributed clean energy generation projects across all sectors. So buildings, transportation, and distributed generation, and you know, really providing that direct capital that folks need to make projects actually happen. And then the second competition, which is the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, which is the remaining $6 billion in that first $20 billion bucket. And we envision awarding somewhere between 2 and 3 hub nonprofits that will serve as sort of technical assistance advisors of networks of different types of lending institutions. And really the intention is to provide that technical assistance and need it in order to ensure that all different types of lending institutions have the ability to, you know, not only lend certain clean energy projects, but also have the capacity and organizational structure and ability to be working in their communities, to be building project pipelines with partners on the ground. And then last but not least is what we are calling the Solar for All program. And so if you remember the Zero Emissions Technology program and the first $7 billion bucket, this is what that is. And so again, The Solar for All program is open to states, territories, tribal, municipal governments, and those eligible nonprofits. Solar for All is 100% low income and disadvantaged community focus. We envision making up to 60 awards under this competition. It is focused on solar deployment, obviously, with the name Solar for All. So we are looking at rooftop solar, community solar, associated storage. So that's an additional piece to the solar conversation, as well as enabling upgrades. And in the implementation framework, we talked about enabling upgrades is really investments that are needed in order to actually install the solar itself. And so as a former solar installer myself, those things can include like electrical upgrades, roof repairs, things along those lines. And so that's really what this funding is meant to support, the deployment of rooftop solar, community solar, and associated storage. The idea is that this is a 50-state plus strategy, and that we really want to be seeding market transformation across all countries. We did a little bit of a back of an envelope calculations recently, and there's 65% of counties currently do not have solar across the United States today. And really the Solar for All program is really to create a mechanism to support as many Americans who want solar to be able to go solar. And so while this is supporting 100% low income and disadvantaged communities, it's also meant to help facilitate market transformation in areas where solar perhaps isn't necessarily available on the market today. And so we're incredibly excited about this program. So let's go to the next slide. I think this is my last slide. Yes. So this slide's a little dated. It says we are here in April. We're actually here in summer, June 2023. But we released our federal assistance listing that talked about that solar focus in February. We then released the implementation framework that I've mentioned a couple of times in April. Again, you can find that on our website at epa.gov/GGRF. And we are planning to release all of the notices of funding opportunities this summer. So as early as June 2023. And so very excited about those competitions, almost ready to hit the street. I will also note that the Solar for All program does have a notice of intent requirement that was in the implementation framework. And so I do want to really highlight that, since that is required to submit an application. The applications for the competitions will be open for about 90 days and close the end of September or later this fall. And we anticipate making awards in early 2024, award announcements, I should say, in 2024, so that we can have those funds awarded by or obligated by September 2024, which is our statutory deadline to obligate those funds. So with that, really excited to answer any GGRF questions later on in the agenda. But with that, I think I am handing it over to Treasury.
Thank you, Nicole. And it's really a pleasure to be here with everyone today. So the Inflation Reduction Act, and we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the Inflation Reduction Act includes tax incentives for a pretty broad range of activities, as well as certain cross-cutting provisions and bonuses that apply to several of those tax incentives. And today's presentation, I'm going to focus mostly both in the presentation and the Q&A on elective pay, which is what kind of the formal name is for direct pay, but really they're the same thing. But before I do that, these incentives include tax credits for things like producing electricity from renewable energy sources, for investing in renewable energy resources. And, through these tax credits, there are incentives for wind, geothermal, solar, energy storage, and more. In addition, there's a credit available to businesses or what we call applicable entities, which I'll talk a little bit more about shortly, that buy qualified commercial clean vehicles, including motor vehicles for use on public roads and mobile machinery for construction, farming, other operations. There's also a credit for alternative fuel vehicle refueling and charging property located in low-income and non-urban areas. And then there are, in addition to several other credits, there are provisions that can increase the value of certain tax credits, including for projects that meet requirements and pay prevailing wages and use registered apprentices, for domestic content, meaning clean energy projects and facilities that meet American manufacturing and sourcing requirements, for projects located in energy communities, including areas with closed coal mines or coal-fired power plants, and for certain investment tax credit, solar and wind facilities that are located in low-income communities, on Indian lands, or federal housing projects are serving low-income households. So next slide. Thank you. So because the time today I have to present and any questions are going to focus on elective pay, I do need to spend a minute on a couple of important disclaimers. So this presentation is an overview of certain tax provisions. It's for general information purposes. It's not tax guidance. It's based on proposed and temporary regulations and other tax guidance on IRS.gov. So in a sense, it's simplifying and generalizing some high-level points about these provisions, but please refer to guidance issued by the IRS for detailed information and rules related to these provisions. For the elective pay guidance, there's a public comment period that's currently open until August 14th. We request any comments you might have be submitted in writing through regulations.gov, where you can file and view public comments. We will carefully consider all the feedback that comes in during the public comment period before issuing final rules. And, we're not able to share substantive information beyond what's in the proposed and temporary rules themselves, since they're under consideration. We can't comment on, provide opinions, interpretations, or answer taxpayer specific questions. So with that, let's dive in a little bit to elective pay on the next slide. Okay, so on June 14th, Treasury and the IRS released proposed guidance that's going to help states, local governments, nonprofits, and other eligible entities access clean energy tax credits. So these new tools or mechanisms, one is called elective pay, which, as I mentioned before, is also known as direct pay, and another that allows the transfer of tax credits. Together, these significantly expand the reach of the clean energy tax credits. They're going to really be a force multiplier for companies and enable communities, startups, nonprofits, and state and local governments to access these credits. So tax exempt and government entities that do not owe federal income taxes for, the first time really are going to be able to get the value of these credits. And kind of unlike competitive grant and loan programs, elective pay allows entities to get their payments if they meet the requirements for elective pay and the underlying tax credit itself, whether that's, the investment tax credit, production tax credit, or one of 12 other credits that you can use elective pay for. And that's really because these entities, would not normally owe federal income tax payments, but by filing a return using elective pay, these entities can get cash payments from the IRS for clean energy tax credits, as long as they meet all these requirements, including a requirement to go through a pre-filing registration process. Okay, next slide. So this slide talks about what I referred to earlier as applicable entities. So this is essentially talking about who's eligible for elective pay. And there's a number of different types of entities that are eligible, including tax exempt organizations, state and political subdivisions, such as local governments, Indian tribal governments, agencies and instrumentalities of state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, and rural electric co-ops, in addition to the others that you see here on this slide. In general, only those entities that are applicable entities for elective pay can use elective pay. However, there are taxpayers that are not applicable entities can elect to be treated as an applicable entity for 3 tax credits: the credit for carbon oxide sequestration for the production of the clean hydrogen or for advanced manufacturing. Next slide. So say you have a project, how do you get elective pay? How do you claim it? How do you receive that payment? So the first thing is obviously to identify and pursue whatever qualifying project or activity you're planning to put in place, whether that's a solar farm, energy storage, whatever it might be. Once it's placed into service, you're going to figure out what your taxable year is, complete what's called the pre-filing registration process with the IRS. And this will include, providing information to the IRS about the credit that you're planning to eventually claim on a tax return, and a little bit about, your organization. The IRS is then going to provide a registration number for each credit property. And after that, you would file the tax return by the due date or the extended due date of that return, make the elective pay, what's called an elective pay election, provide the registration number that the IRS gave you in the pre-filing process. And then after the return is processed, you'd receive payment for that claim. All right, next slide. So we heard a lot from my colleagues at USDA, EPA, and Energy about several of their really amazing programs. And I wanted to spend a minute to talk about a special rule that's in our proposed elective pay guidance. And this rule would enable entities to combine grants and forgivable loans with tax credits. So if an investment-related tax credit property is funded through one of these grants or forgivable loans, entities can still get that same value of the eligible tax credit as if the investment were financed with taxable funds, provided that the tax credit amount plus restricted tax exempt amounts don't exceed the total cost of the investment. And in the slides here, there's kind of an example of how this would work. I'm not gonna, in the interest of time and getting to people's questions, I'm not gonna go through this example, but it's here and I can talk about it later, or it'll be here for future reference. Next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there are 12 tax credits that are eligible for elective pay. The next two slides just very briefly talk about what each of those tax provisions are and has a description for each of those provisions. This is both here and in the slide deck. You can also find this information on irs.gov, where you're going to find the latest information about both elective pay, but also all the tax credit guidance that we're putting out related to the Inflation Reduction Act. And then so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I talked a little bit about these already, certain bonuses or requirements that can affect the value of certain tax credits. One of the things I did want to mention here is I saw a question in the chat about whether the Energy Communities bonus was a competitive allocation program. And the Energy Communities bonus for projects located in historical energy communities is different from the low-income communities bonus credit program in that regard. The low-income communities bonus credit program, you do have to go through this application process before you would receive a capacity allocation. So we'll go on to the next slide. And the last thing I wanted to say about elective pay in my time here today is just that there's a lot more material on irs.gov /elective pay. There are a series of frequently asked questions that I think people will find very helpful. There are fact sheets for state and local governments, for tax exempt organizations, for tribal governments. There is basically a one-pager that provides information about the different applicable tax credits that you can use with elective pay. So I really encourage folks to check out those resources. And then, irs.gov clean energy is where all the latest guidance is being posted for all of the tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act. And cleanenergy.gov is also a really great resource, and cleanenergy.gov/direct pay. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Jackie Ponte, who is Chief Innovation Officer at USDA. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and hello, everyone. So now you know all of these great programs and you've digested it all and you know what you're going to do. My guess is that's not true. This is a lot of information we're providing for you. This is, as the administrator said at the top of the hour, and Mr. Podesta, this is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. And as you can see today, across the federal government, we want you to be able to take advantage of as many of these programs as you are eligible for, and that will help you make these very important investments. So to that end, we wanted to give you some place to start, and we've created a clean energy pocket guide. It's coming soon. We've worked across all of the federal agencies who are on today's call and have created 2 guides. One is applicant driven, where it'll list all of the types of eligible applicants for various programs and which agencies programs each of those applicants is eligible for. The other is focused more on purpose of how you might use those funds, and then each of the programs that might be applicable to you. It's a really good place to start to see how you might either stack or braid or use these multiple programs at different stages in your projects or for multiple projects you are working on. We will be updating it on a regular basis, as you heard today. Some programs are launched, others are in the process of launching, others have some regulations to get into place and some comments from you to get before they finalize. And so as these programs evolve, we will keep this guide up to date, and it'll be made available publicly, hopefully very soon, but definitely this summer. We are working to get that cleared through our process, and we hope that you find it very useful. It will be posted when we make it public on the RD Inflation Reduction Act page, and we will make it available to all our colleagues on this call, and they'll be able to post it on their pages as well. One caveat is that you can't. This is a guide. It's to help you get started, to figure out which programs might be of interest to you. You will always have to take a look at the programs for specific eligibilities and for other requirements to apply for the program. And with that, I will turn it over to Elisa.
Thanks so much, Jackie. So as Jackie mentioned, we have the cross-agency clean energy pocket guide that she just described. So it'll be coming soon. And in addition, we will be emailing everyone who is on this webinar who registered a notification that is available. A video of this virtual event along with the slides will be posted in approximately 10 days at this website here, RD, which stands for ruraldevelopment.usda.gov/Inflation Reduction Act. And key links and contacts from today's event are going to be shared in the chat function. So if you want to get started in digging in before you get those slides, feel free to click on the links that my colleagues are putting into the chat box as we continue into the Q&A section. And then most importantly, for those who don't know, there are state and local USDA rural development officers in every part of the country. So they're a tremendous asset, and please feel free to reach out to them and they can help guide which of the programs might be relevant to your context. And this link here leads you to where you can find your local representative. So with that, next slide, we're going to move over to our Q&A section. And this is the contact info, again, for the USDA specific electric programs. And if you have specific questions that are relevant to the Rural Utility Service, PACE, or New Era programs that we don't get to today, please feel free to send a message to our inbox at sm.rd.rus.ira.questions@usda.gov, which you can also find on our website. And we do monitor and update our FAQs to respond to those questions regularly. So with that, let's bring all the speakers back online. We're going to do some Q&A from the questions that folks have put into the box. So please feel free to continue putting questions in there. And along with the speakers from today, we'll be joined with some program experts who might jump in to answer certain questions. So with that, Scott, if you want to close the slide deck and just bring all of our speakers on, I will go to moderating a question that came from Jane Hotchkiss. How will the awards be safeguarded so that they result in actual projects? In other words, projects which have site, separate financing, and have fully committed off-takers. Will these be eligible for rec trades? Did any of our panelists want to take this one? Christine?
No, I was just coming on camera.
Oh, great. Okay.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So how will the awards be safeguarded so that they result in actual projects? In other words, projects which have site, separate financing, and have fully committed off-takers. Will these be eligible for rec trades? So I could start us off from the Rural Utilities Service, and then colleagues from other agencies, please chime in. So at the Rural Utilities Service, under Administrator Burke, the rules have been written so that you only get compensated. The loan forgiveness part only occurs after the clean energy project is operational. So that is a protection that we won't be spending money on projects that don't actually materialize, but each applicant is really responsible for getting the project fully executed before the federal funding comes in. So that's one of the key safeguards that we have in place. And for the rural utility service programs, RECs are eligible and we don't touch them. So each entity can use them as they wish in the market. We do not claim that environmental or renewable asset. And it looks like Nicole, please.
Yeah, I'll just add for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, really it is our intention to leverage as much external capital and funding resources and private sector capital as possible. So if SRECs or solar renewable energy credits or energy credits generally are available to that project, we would highly encourage the leverage of those RECs to fully finance those projects. So that's all I wanted to add.
Great. Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on to a DOE question. Are the DOE efficiency programs being described here only for rural areas, or can they be used in other regions?
I can chime in here. It does depend on which of the DOE programs you're referring to. The Energy Transition for Rural and Remote Community is really just for those communities, but the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, for example, it covers 2,700 recipients. So all the states, 1,800 local governments and 700 tribes through the formula program. And then there is a competitive program as well that is for the eligibility for that is any local governments or tribes that were not eligible to receive a formula grant. So it really touches a lot of different parts of the country. So each program is slightly different. I think we put forward ones here where we knew rural communities were eligible, but not the program wasn't necessarily just for rural communities.
Great. And I can chime in for the RUS programs. It does need to be primarily rural, but you can have some portion of your program be for non-rural areas, as long as the majority is for rural. Okay, moving on to a question, consolidating a few for the Treasury Department. At what stage does a project become eligible for elective pay?
So it's a great question. Elective pay is only available after the tax credit is earned and able to be claimed on the relevant tax return. So in general, a tax credit is earned during the taxable year that the applicable credit property is placed into service. That's for the investment tax credits, or eligible production occurs for production tax credits. So an applicable entity can use elective pay with respect to 12 credits, as long as it meets the underlying credits requirements and they've earned the credit.
Great. All right. And looking over here, we've got a question that we can apply to everyone. Just as an individual, how do I go and find a heat pump rebate or some other rebate that would be relevant to me as an individual? So for us at USDA, within the Rural Utility Services, our programs are not specific to individuals, and I will pass the baton on to DOE.
Sure. So the Department of Energy actually just launched a great new tool called the Energy Savings Hub for homeowners and renters and drivers. So you can take a look at all of the different programs for whoever you are, what you're looking for. And we're hoping to roll out more of these types of hubs for other entities as well. So local governments, small businesses, et cetera. So I can put a link to that. It's energy.gov/save is how you can find it. And then you can browse through, again, depending on if you're an owner, renter, driver, other rebates that you can find there.
And I would just add that I do think I agree that that's a really great resource, including first related to information about some of the tax credits that are available. And so thank you to DOE for putting that out there and working with us on it.
Great. And then another Treasury question, when do I file for elective pay and when will we get paid?
Yeah, so good question. Let me just talk through a little bit of an example here to describe how this could work. So let's assume that we've got a state and local government that's going to have a calendar year end for tax purposes. So let's say that local government makes a clean energy investment, they qualify for the investment tax credit. They can file an annual tax return. Typically, this would be, with Form 990T with the IRS to claim elective pay for the full value of that investment tax credit, as long as they're meeting the requirements and go through the pre-filing registration process. Assuming this local government does not owe other federal income tax, the IRS is going to make them a refund payment in the amount of the credit. So let's talk about an investment, say in 2023. That clean energy project goes into service late in 2023 or earlier in 2024, before that tax return is due. The state and local government is then going to complete the pre-filing registration process with the IRS. Their, in this example, their due date of their tax return would typically be May 15th. If they don't file or want an extension. And then after that refund is processed, or after that tax return, is processed in 2024, the payment would be issued.
Great. And I'm going to jump back into what I had said about the rural utility service programs not being eligible for individuals, but we do have a USDA program REAP that is eligible, as Administrator Andy discussed. So if you're an individual or small business and want to create clean energy on your facilities, that would be a program to look at. So moving over to Sarah Mathias's question, how can small rural utilities obtain technical assistance for grant applications? Maybe I'll start. Do any of my colleagues have responses to that for their agencies? From the USDA perspective, we do have a technical assistance capacity. It is limited because these are competitive grants, so we can't really provide tailored individual technical assistance from within the agency. There are a fair number of nonprofits out there that are providing support. So if you want to maybe send us a individual email, we could try to connect, or maybe other people on these types of webinars, but it's not something that we can provide because we need to be fairly neutral to all folks applying. There are technical assistance programs, I think, once folks become funded. Does DOE have anything to that effect that you want to share?
Say similar along the lines of what you said, based on the grant, they're so varied. We do have a range of TA opportunities, either formally through the program, the different offering through the particular portal, and we do have different timing for being able to have specific TA help. So it just depends on the program. It depends on when the the application is due. It depends on a lot of the application process. So yes, we do have, I think for like in the for the ERA program that we mentioned, our ERA in OSED. I know some of the other programs with the grid office as well as the SCEP. So the high level answer is yes. It would just be if you could send a specific, go to the website. Christine mentioned the Energy Savings Hub website. And as we also have another neat link, the Clean Infrastructure website for energy.gov/clean infrastructure. It lists all of the opportunities through Bill and IRA, as well as it shows to kind of like the timeline of each of the programs in a neat grid. So you can follow along on what's coming up next, when the next milestone is. It shows all of the history and all of the resources for the application process. So we do have those opportunities available. It would just depend on the program and the timing.
Great. And from Susan Atwood, are there any funds available for nonprofits to purchase electric vehicles?
So I can speak a little bit to that. As I was saying in my presentation, many nonprofits, if they meet the definition of an applicable entity, can use elective pay. And one of the tax credits that's available under elective pay is the commercial clean vehicle credit. So if they meet the requirements of both the commercial clean vehicle credit and elective pay, they could take advantage potentially of those provisions.
Great.
Lisa, can I jump in for just a second? And I'm going to strain the definition of answering a question. So I'm going to answer another question along with that I want to answer. And that is, while we haven't strictly talked about this here, Rural Utilities Service has what we call the Rural Energy Savings Program, which will allow us to loan money to entities at a 0% interest rate, which they can then loan to somebody else at up to 5%, and then pay it back through some kind of on-bill mechanism. But one of the things, many things that will allow people to do is to buy electric chargers for electric vehicles, So while that doesn't strictly answer the question, that's one thing that we're seeing communities take advantage of is the Rural Energy Savings Program. That's not competitive. We have plenty of funding for that. And it's a way for you to do all kinds of things in your community, from making sure that houses are more energy efficient to buying chargers for electric vehicles.
Thank you, Administrator. Great. All right. Where do we discover areas in which there is no solar? Where do we discover a map for the 65 counties you mentioned? So I'm not sure exactly, but
That was me.
Great.
Yeah. And that was a back of the envelope calculation. I'm pretty sure I said that. So we don't have a public map that shows that, but definitely a good resource that folks might be interested in seeing. So thanks for that recommendation. We may work on that.
Great. And to recap, the energy communities maps is something that Department of Energy directs. So you can go to the DOE site, right, to find that. And then for the definitions on distressed communities and energy communities, maybe if we could just go around and say which of our agencies are in charge of which of the important maps that folks might want to be looking at now.
Sure. So we work with the Department of Energy team on a couple of different maps, including maps related to energy communities that are hosted on the Department of Energy website. In our guidance around the low-income communities bonus credit, there's also relevant definitions there, and we also work with the DOE team on some maps specific to the qualifying advanced energy project credit, which was discussed a little bit earlier in this presentation as well.
Nicole, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of talk about our area of jurisdiction / maps. So, we're really zeroing in on the CJUST model, which is the climate and economic justice screening tool that the White House released earlier. I think it was just earlier this year. And that tool really identifies disadvantaged communities through a number of different mapping layers. And so that's sort of driving the baseline of how we're defining disadvantaged communities. However, I do want to caveat that there are other maps out there that can help sort of overlay. So like EPA also has the EJ screen tool, which is also a mapping tool that helps identify EJ communities. And we also want to make sure that we're capturing low-income households that are not in disadvantaged communities, but still could utilize or benefit from the deployment of solar technologies. So we want to make sure that they're included in the conversations as well. So stay tuned to when the competitions are actually being released. There will be an extensive definition of which mapping tools you can use to determine whether or not those areas qualify for subsidy.
Great. And there's a lot of questions in the Q&A about finding what your area qualifies for. As folks may know, the definition of rural does depend on the program. Sometimes that's statutorily defined by Congress. Sometimes it's the agency that defines it. So for each program, you'll have to look at the specific definition of that, and we will relay the excellent suggestion in the chat for a website where you could plug in your address and find what qualifies. I love that idea. We will pass that along. Okay, so where can we go? Oh, that's the one we just answered. Is replacement of copper wire within our distribution lines an eligible project? I guess we would need to hear a little bit more about that question, unless one of my colleagues has a thought on that.
I'll just say for our stuff at the Rural Utility Service, at least under New Era for the electric co-ops, the key to it is it reducing your greenhouse gas emissions or helping you to transmit more electricity? Are you doing something that is going to reconductor in a way that will use some other kind of material that will help you out? And so you're going to have to show that it's either connected to a renewable resource or that it is somehow renewable or zero emission resource, or it is somehow saving you greenhouse gas emissions by doing it.
Great. Whitney, please.
As a follow-up to that, for some of the programs that Teresa talked about, specifically within the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership Program, the GRIP program that we have over at the Department of Energy, that has one that has the Grid Resilience program that could potentially look at upgrading the distribution lines to help harden the system and improve its resiliency. So I'd encourage you to look at the resources that'll be shared from this, but after this, but from DOE, specifically in the Grid Deployment Office, that may offer resources and opportunities to help for the distribution line questions that you offer, in addition to the programs that the administrator mentioned.
Great. And a question for Solar for All. Does the Solar for All program follow the same labor standard guidelines as the other IRA clean energy programs?
As an IRA program, we are required to follow all guidelines, so including Davis-Bacon and other sort of labor guidance that we have.
Great. And follow up for you, will Solar for All consider other technology, specifically distributed wind, under the Solar for All?
So under Solar for All, as part of the federal assistance listing and the implementation framework, we were very specific that we are focused on rooftop solar, community solar, and associated storage for the Solar for All program. I will note that distributed wind is very much an applicable technology under the other $20 billion funds.
Great. And last Solar for All, while I have you on the hot seat, the can Solar for All fund additional rooftop PV and PV on canopies over parking and driveway, plus battery storage in order to power vehicles charging as well as the building?
So the Solar for All program really is meant to help facilitate the deployment of low cost solar, rooftop solar, community solar, and storage for 100% low income and disadvantaged communities. That solar can be used to power anything they need it to power. So just anything that's plugged into the wall. And so whether those are the building usage itself and or electric vehicles, either way is eligible. And so again, as long as the funding is going towards low income households. And so I do want to emphasize that it is meant to be a residential program. It's definitely captured under the scope and intent of the program.
Great. And for Treasury, how will the elective pay work with the new ERA program, as much as you're able to share?
So, you know, what I would say is I would go back to the example that I had before about competitive grants and loans, and how there is a special rule for grants and loans in our proposed elective pay guidance. So I don't want to get into too much because the specific facts and circumstances could matter, but I would encourage you to look at that special rule in terms of figuring out whether or not you'll be able to take advantage of both that program and the elective pay election and any underlying credits.
And can I just add, because I know Matt is in a tough position. You could see him. He's trying the best he can. I really appreciate it. Know that he has limitations in that. If you look at what we did with New Era and with PACE, the goal was to make these both these as attractive as possible to people who want to build renewable and zero carbon emission energy in for rural America. And so you'll see in there that both of them are stackable with other opportunities. And I think that reflects the president's desire to make sure that we get these programs out running and get projects built. At the same time, because of statutes, because of regulations, for all kinds of reasons, not everything can be stackable with others. We recognize that. And so as the Treasury puts out more guidance, I think ours, because of our peculiar statutes, we're able to make sure that they're stackable. But I would just urge everybody to pay really close attention, as Matt was saying earlier, if you take advantage of these so that you can make sure that your particular project qualifies.
Great. All right, and I think let's find one last question as we prepare to wrap up. Okay, Amy Collins, I've searched everywhere and cannot find a low-income communities map. What map should we use to determine which communities qualify? So I guess I can start by saying I don't know of a low communities map, but we do have distressed communities, disadvantaged communities, and energy communities, which are all inclusive of low-income communities. So is there anything that anyone wants to add about a go-to mapping location? Jackie, I see that you added into the chat, the USDA RD uses various indices, including the CJust one, and she included a link to this. Matt, do you want to jump in? Anyone add anything to this?
Sure. And as we get closer to launch, we will put links on the website for where people can go to those various sources and look up whether areas meet those qualifications. So stay tuned. They'll be on our Inflation Reduction Act website.
Yeah, and so I guess I think that this is this question is about the low-income communities bonus credit, which provides an additional investment tax credit for certain solar and wind facilities located in low-income communities, Indian lands, federal housing projects, or serving low-income households. So for this credit, you have to apply and receive a capacity allocation and then place the facility in service to claim this bonus. We are going through the guidance process right now related to the low-income communities bonus credit. We have, within the last 30 days, I'd say, published information in the Federal Register about this particular topic. The application process for this program is not yet open, but I would say, stay tuned on irs.gov/clean energy, and there's going to be more information about, we'll obviously make more information about this credit available as we're able to.
Wonderful.
Eliza, we also at DOE to add to what Matt said and the others, we also provide a link. We have a map as it relates to energy communities that we worked on with the labs and in collaboration with a lot of the partners here. So we'll also provide that link for the person who was asking to get that direct website to be able to understand where the different assets are located and how when the reinvestment decisions are being made, some of the other factors that they can contemplate.
Great. I'll throw out the last two, which are for EPA Solar for All, and then turn it over to Administrator Burke to wrap us up. So we have a question about for Solar for All in the 50 state plus strategy. Is the thought that these funds will be funded to state level nonprofits that will then in turn fund projects within each state, with each state returning those programs, distributing them? And then 2, how will we find out if we are a qualifying nonprofit for the Solar for All program?
Yeah, so couple great questions in there. So the idea is that we're hoping that every geography, so every state and territory in the country will have at least one application. And so that's part of the reason why the notice of intent is so important, so that we can see who is planning to apply. And so states are required to submit their notice of intent within 30 days. Those will be made public. And then municipalities, territories, tribal governments are required to submit their notice of intent later on. And what that is meant to do is help people, give people an understanding of who is applying for which geographies. So, if you're applying for a certain state, to serve a certain state, you will know if the state is intending on applying or if some other entity representing the state or is operating in the state is planning on applying based on those notice of intents. And then in terms of the eligible entity, there will be very detailed information in the competition language itself that talks about what requirements that nonprofit needs to hit in order to be considered a lending nonprofit. And so again, if it's a type of nonprofit that does lending, but does not take deposits. And so if that's your type of nonprofit, great. But that guidance, there'll be further guidance in the competition language themselves. Hope that answers the question.
Great. Well, thanks so much. And let me end by first thanking John Podesta for being here today. I want to also thank the incredible representatives that took time out of their busy schedules to be with us from EPA, DOE, Treasury. But most of all, I want to thank y'all for putting rural communities at the heart of what you do and making sure that more Americans can succeed. And then I also want to thank all the people who are on here. Before I joined the federal government, I was a local official, and I'll just say that you can get overwhelmed. I'll back up and say I wish I were this overwhelmed when I was a local official, because we never saw opportunities like this. But I know that there is that tendency to get overwhelmed by the amount of things out there. All I can say is that there are tremendous opportunities today for rural America. particularly on clean energy, also on other infrastructure. We've never seen opportunities like this with the president succeeding to put these pieces at the front of his agenda. And so whatever it is, find your opportunity in these different places and take advantage of it, because it will help the people in your community. Thanks so much, and we look forward to working with you in the future.